Alright, so now we're going to learn spiral wraps. Spiral wraps are going to be tricky for some of you if your poi are not a good length for you. What I mean by that is that your poi need to be exactly the same length, and there's a trick to helping you learn this. You take your strings and you swap them. So let's see, on my left hand, the string's coming down, and this one, the string's coming up. If I do this, it makes my spiral wraps come together a lot nicer. Because of the way they work. If you have trouble with them, try holding your handles like this. Okay? You don't have to do that. It's just something that helps some people. Like if they have really long strings, they need to shorten them up. That gets to my next point. When you're doing these, you want to make sure that it comes around to kind of like a flapping place. It'll flap correctly. And when it gets to that point in spiral wraps, what you want to do is you want to twist your wrist with it and throw it back. So with one hand, get it land on that spot, and then flick your wrist to make it come off. So go with it and then throw it back. 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 So I kind of like cock my hand back and then throw it back. Right? And you can cock it back a little bit early and actually turn your wrist towards it as soon as it hits, and it'll start bouncing. Okay. Now typically you want this to wrap around like 2 times. When you're doing spiral wraps, if you have a really long string, make sure that it only wraps around your hand about, you want to have 2 beats of spin on that. You don't want to have them super long because then they'll be in spiral wrap for so long, they'll be next to impossible to leave. At the same time, you don't want them super, super, super short because that's going to make it harder to learn. There's 2 different ways we can do this. So I'm going to hold my poi like this with my strings in the middle, that way they are the same length when I go to do this move. If you hold it like between your fingers, the symmetry is off when you do this, and you'll see that later on. So I'm doing this motion here, I'm doing a weave, and when I do it, I'm going to bring my hands together. When I bring them together, I'm going to bring them together like this, right? And I'm also going to bring them up. Okay? I'm not going to point them down, I'm not going to point them straight up, I'm going to point them up a little bit. Because when they're spinning, they're going to start, the string's going to start rolling down your fingers and fall off. If I don't have my hands pointed up, and I go to do this, it's going to want to fall off. It's going to do that, and it'll be screwed. You don't want that. You want it to wrap up around your hands and back. Alright? And when they hit, do that motion where you turn your wrist to cock it back. So, and then throw them out. Like that. And if you're still having problems with them falling off, the trick I use, instead of putting your hands together in this kind of like clapping, praying motion, put them like this, with the backs of your hands like this, and turn your hands just a little bit inwards to hold that string in. It's actually a lot easier to do that way if you're having a problem with the string falling off. Oops. There we go. And you just make sure that your hands kind of overlap a little bit when you're doing your move. Now, if you pick up on this fairly quickly, you're going to like this next part. So now we're going to play with the spiral wraps themselves and do a quick bit of variation with them. So you can do a spiral wrap straight into one, or you can actually wrap them around each hand independently and then bring them together, right? Another thing is that you don't have to come out of them completely after you do them. You can actually bounce them back and forth a couple of times. Right? So play with that idea where they wrap around your hand once and then bring them together. And you might feel like you have a bit more control with them. You can play with them more. They will bring them out, bring them up and down, that whole thing. And then try wrapping them around twice, and you should have just a little bit of string left. You should still be able to do this. Or have them together. Oops. This. And then just kind of unwrap them again, and then go back into it. And those are spiral wraps, and those are a bunch of the variations to it. Hopefully you enjoy that. It was something that kind of got lost after bowstringing died out a bit and people started doing more koi. But it still plays in it. It's a nice bit of variation to just doing a spiral wrap. Like if you do spiral wrap, come out one and then go back in, right? And then you come back out, in one, in one. So there's those. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be going into a couple more moves, and eventually we'll be getting to these really tough ones.